how will Web3 reshape work? So, as I'm sure many of you have probably seen, there's lots of hype around crypto and Web3. There's lots of believers, and they don't shy away from making grandiose predictions about the space. You might have seen articles like, the future of work is not corporate, it's DAOs and crypto networks, or the internet is just investment banking now, and all our lives are going to be financialized by Web3. You might even have seen that, you probably work for a protocol someday. So, if these are things you probably have seen or heard of and you want to understand a bit more, that's essentially what we're trying to figure out here today. There's lots of hype, but we're trying to sort of go beneath the hype and try and, understand the space from first principles. And of course, wherever there's strong believers, there's also naysayers. And yeah, the naysayers are, Web3, I have my doubts. Elon Musk says Web3 sounds like BS. Web3 is centralized and inefficient. The funny thing is Web3 as it exists today appears to be building towards and is actually more centralized than the web it seeks to replace. So there's tons of different opportunities, different points of view about the Web3 space. And, it can be hard to, if you're someone who's coming out from the outside, trying to understand, okay, what's really happening here? Where's the opportunity? And how should I think about this space? Sometimes it's challenging because there's all these different points of view. And so I think, I guess you might even be asking, what is Web3 anyway? Like, it's becoming sort of a buzzword, but what is it actually? And so Chris Dixon is a partner at A16Z, and A16Z is one of the biggest proponents of the Web3 space. And he suggested this definition: Web3 is the internet owned by the builders and users, orchestrated with tokens. That's a bit of a mouthful. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Certainly doesn't make sense to me. So I think, that's a bit too complicated. I think an easier approach to understand Web3 is to sort of ask, what are the distinct properties of the underlying technology that Web3 is built on top of, which is in most cases blockchains. And so I think it's best to first understand, what are the key properties of blockchains. The first is blockchains are immutable databases. That means if you make a record, you can't change it. It's permanent. The second is that decentralized. That means that there's no single party that controls this database. And the third is they are permissionless. Most times the code is open source and anyone can read or write to this database as long as you can connect to a node on the network. And so these three properties, you probably don't need to know how it happens, but what you need to know is that these three properties, a database that's immutable, decentralized, and permissionless, gives rise to new possibilities in software. The first one is you have computers that can make commitments. That means that when you write code, you can be sure that it will run as designed. That's a very interesting property. It's a very useful property and gives rise to new applications. The second one is, again, because you can now make commitments with code, then it's now possible to own digital items that live on these blockchains. And by owning it essentially means that you can control it. Like you can decide when to send it, where to send it. That's sort of what control means, ownership. And the third one is that it's possible to now build systems that are fully transparent and public. And you can sort of have independently verifiable facts because everyone has access to the same source of truth. And so, laying this background, I guess the way I would define Web3 is it's essentially new models for building software and internet businesses and networks that leverage these capabilities. And so, having said that, we go back to the question we're trying to answer. How is Web3 reshaping work? The first way we've seen is there's emergence of new platforms that are more economically aligned with users. So because of the properties which I just described, it's now possible for users to sort of sign up to a platform that they feel is maybe their work is being more fairly compensated. And because it's permissionless, they can shift to any other platform they want. And also because you can now own digital items, you could actually own your content. So it's possible to have more economic alignment. The second way we've seen is Web3 is introducing new ways to earn money. And we're going to talk more about that later. And the third way is Web3 introduces new mechanisms for groups of people to coordinate in a trustless manner. You might have heard of DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. I think they were mentioned in one of the previous screenshots. And yeah, that's sort of what it's all about. It's about ways to coordinate. Historically, human beings have sort of invented this thing called a corporation, and that's sort of how people come together and form an organization. We won't really talk much about this, but just want to touch on it. And the third one is Web3 introduces novel ways to prove credentials and accomplishments. This is another interesting area for the Jobtech space. So because of the limited time today, we'll probably only focus on the first two ways. And so first is, how exactly does Web3 economically align? How does it result in more economically aligned platforms? So historically, in Web2 platforms, like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, the platform historically tries to first attract users. And at that time, it's, they're doing their best to have the best user experience because they try and attract users. But as they grow and, they have to monetize, the platforms tend to be more and more extractive. So the examples we've seen, for example, YouTube and Facebook, at the beginning, maybe your newsfeed was mostly friends and family. And slowly by slowly, it's, 1, 2, 3 posts and you see an ad. You watch 1, 2 videos and then you have an ad. So the platform is trying to extract more and more value from its users. Another example we've seen is on Facebook, at the beginning, Facebook pages, you would have likes on your page and those people would see your posts whenever you would post. But right now, having people that like you or follow you doesn't guarantee that they will see whatever you post. The way to do that is to sponsor your posts, which is another example of how these platforms are being extracted. So another example of such a platform is Upwork. So the way we're seeing Web3 shift this is in 3 ways. One is ownership and control of the platform is decentralized. And in some cases, users are able to participate in governance of the platform. The second is users have control over their data and content. So, when you upload your content to Facebook or YouTube, you're sort of, in a way, handing control of that content to the platform. But in Web3, because of this, because of the concept of ownership of digital items, it's actually possible to own whatever content you create. And then the last interesting thing is Web3 platforms, by definition, have a strong incentive to be minimally extractive. That's because the systems are open source and permissionless. That means that, it takes almost zero effort for a user to wake up and walk onto the next platform. So if you're being, if you're not treating your users well, they could just wake up and move on to the next platform. So there's a really strong incentive for you to future use as well. And one interesting platform that I want to highlight here is called BrainTrust, and it's a web3 job matching platform, which is essentially a freelancer marketplace. It launched in 2020, and it has over 36,000 job seekers and over 700,000 members. And they've raised over $120 million. So it's one of the most successful examples of a Web3 job matching platform. The other interesting thing we're seeing with Web3 platforms is that they present new ways to earn. And I quickly want to touch on these 4 ways. So the first, which you'll dig a bit deeper into, is called play to earn. And it's essentially, when you have the intersection of gaming and blockchains, you're able to sort of have a brand new business model for game developers that, from the perspective of users, results into this whole thing of playing games and being able to earn money. And similarly, it's possible to have learn to earn as well, where companies are able to reward users for consuming or learning content. So, an example could be Adobe if Adobe wants people to learn how to use Photoshop, one way is, hey, let's run an advertising campaign. The other way could just be, let's incentivize people to learn how to use our platform. Because now if people are able to prove that, hey, I've passed level 1 to 3, and it's independently verifiable, then you might say, okay, let's give some kind of reward for people who learn our content. And there's many different ways this could be applied. The third is create to earn. And you might have heard of the whole NFT craze. We won't really talk much about this, but NFTs are essentially introduce the idea of uniqueness. So you're able to have a digital object or a representation of a digital object that is unique. And so for things like art and other creative material, you could either charge royalties, like, whenever, for example, a song is played. You could have things like token getting, which is essentially, if you're a small music band, historically, the way people support their favorite bands is you might buy a t-shirt, you might buy merchandise from the band. And so NFTs allow fans to support their favorite creators in that way. And creators are able to sort of create gated content, like the way you have paywalls. And you could have, for example, content that's only accessible by fans of yours that have a special NFT. And that in that way, when you create, you're able to earn from your content in a novel way. The third, which is, I think, a bit underexplored, is judge to earn. There's some material in this on the internet by a guy called Steven McKeown. If you're interested in learning more about this, I myself haven't actually seen any application of this, but yeah, I think it's something to look out for. So for today's conversation, again, because of time, we'll focus mostly on the play to earn space. And so, you might have heard of play to earn, you might not have heard of it, and we're going to try and understand it better. So the first thing that helps to understand play to earn is to first understand the traditional gaming business models. So there's been primarily 2 major business models for games. The first is pay to play. And this is sort of how traditional video games operated. You buy a cartridge, you buy a CD, a DVD, and then you can play the game as much as you want. Then, these days there's other games where instead of buying a CD or DVD, you could just pay a monthly subscription, and then you can play the game whenever you want to play it. But like I guess you all know, gaming has sort of went from this niche video gaming industry to now much more casual games that are played on smartphones. And on smartphones, one of I guess the most dominant business models is free to play. And typically these games are either ad supported, or sometimes they might have in-game purchases like boosters. And sometimes these are called, that model is called pay to win, because by paying, you might be able to skip steps. So, by spending, you're able to win in the game. The third model, which is, I think, most interesting these days, is in-game virtual goods. And we've seen games like Fortnite do this. And the difference between in-game purchases and in-game virtual goods is essentially the virtual goods are just cosmetic. They do not give you like any superpower. It's just, hey, I want to have this really nice skin for my characters and play the game. And yeah, many of the more sophisticated games today, like Fortnite, League of Legends, Clash Royale, all utilize this model. And so looking at these traditional gaming models, there's a few limitations that they have. So the first one is players can't sell in-game purchases or gift them to other users. So, you spend on all these different artifacts in the game, but you sort of buy them, and once you're done using them, you can't really, they don't have any value anymore. They can only be used within the game. Similarly, there's a couple of games that allow you to earn some kind of in-game currency whenever you win, but more often than not, these points or currencies can't really be used outside the game. And then because of this, we've seen black markets emerge where users actually sell their game accounts online, for example, on Reddit. There's actually one user who was able to make over $400,000 from, selling gaming accounts for World of Warcraft. And so without, having that background, it helps you realize that play to earn is actually not really something new. It's more an evolution of these older models. And the two key things that we see in play to earn is you have real ownership of these digital assets. And this happens primarily through the use of NFTs. So, for example, a skin that you buy in Fortnite, if this was happening on a web3 game, then you would actually have that skin, you would have ownership of it on your wallet. And that means, you might be able to trade it, you might be able to sell it. The other thing is the rewards that you earn in the game. If a game is offering you some kind of currency, this currency is usually in the form of a crypto token. And it turns out these tokens can be exchanged for fiat, depending on how the game is designed. And yeah, so I guess the most dominant game today, the most dominant play to earn game is called Axie Infinity. I don't know if I guess some of you have heard of it, but it's been this sensation that really took off at the end of last year, towards the end of last year. And yeah, I guess in summary, play to earn, I would say it's a new business model where game developers share game revenues with players with the hope that it will drive adoption. And yeah, I guess we'll sort of dig a bit deeper into how exactly Axie Infinity does this sharing of revenues. But yeah, in a nutshell, this is sort of the way to understand play to earn gaming. And yeah, so we did an in-depth study on Axie Infinity, trying to understand, what it really is and why it's taking off, because it was taking off primarily in emerging markets in the Philippines and Vietnam. And just a few numbers to sort of give those who are not familiar a sense of just how big Axie Infinity became. So one is, and these are numbers as of today, Axie Infinity has over 1.5 million daily active users as of April. This number has gone up as high as 2.7 million at some point during its peak. On average, players today earn about $400 per month. So that is when you get the in-game currency that you earn from playing and you convert it to fiat money or normal cash, your earnings, the average player earns about $400. At some point, this number was as high as $1,000, but it's gradually come down. And then the other interesting number to know is because of the dynamics of the game, in order to start playing the game, you need to first purchase 3 Axies, and these cost about $300 as of today. So in order to play Axie Infinity, you need about $300 to get started. And Axie Infinity made $1.3 billion in revenue last year. So this is, sort of part of the reason why the play to earn space is really heating up, because, there's gaming developers are saying there's actually, money to be made in here. It's not just some kind of cute game. There's actually a strong business case for it. And in terms of adoption, the Philippines sort of has the highest adoption at 40.5%. Venezuela is at 6.3%. Then you have the US, Thailand, and then a couple of other countries, mostly in Southeast Asia. And yeah, so, I've sort of given you these numbers, but still haven't really explained how Axie Infinity works. And the way to understand, so the way the game works, it's a strategy game where you battle with Axies. Axies are just these little creatures. And in order to play, you need to assemble 3 of them, and you battle against another team that also has 3 of them. And in order to play, you need to first purchase these 3 monsters, these 3 Axies. And that's where the $300 figure comes from. On average, it will cost you to have a decent team. You'll be spending, I think, between $75 to $100 per Axie. And so that's sort of the game. It's hard to describe it without some kind of visual, but that's about as much as you need to know. The other thing you need to know is that whenever you win a battle in this game, you earn an in-game currency called the Smooth Love Potion, SLP in short form. And this is similar to many other games. The only difference here is that this currency that you earn can be exchanged for fiat money. So if you have SLP, there's an exchange rate for SLP to, usually it's to Ethereum, and then from Ethereum to USD, but you might even be able to exchange SLP to USD. So, by playing this game, you earn SLP, and this SLP can be converted to USD. So that's sort of how the whole play to earn thing comes about. So you might be wondering how, where does this money actually come from? Who is offering cash for SLP? And the way to understand this is to sort of look at how what people in the crypto space call the tokenomics of the game. What incentives have sort of been set up into the game that allow this to happen. And there's 3 things to understand here. The first is that these Axies, these monsters that you used to battle, lose their power. The more you play, the more you battle them, the more they lose their power. So, at some point you might need to get new Axies. The second thing you need to know is that the only way that new Axies come into being is through a process called breeding. You essentially get 2 Axies, and each Axie has different attributes, and they sort of mate and they're able to give rise to new Axies. But the only way that's possible is by paying some SLP. So in order to breed a new Axie, you need to pay a small amount of SLP. And so that is essentially what drives demand for SLP. So anyone who wants to purchase a new Axie, that Axie has to come from somewhere. And the only way to create new Axies is by breeding old Axies. And the breeding process requires SLP. So, you might be thinking about this whole thing and wondering, okay, that that sounds like something I've seen before. It sounds like a Ponzi scheme that, the way that the process sort of keeps on sustaining is by having new people coming in. So without new players coming in to play the game, then there's no demand for breeding. There's no demand for SLP. So, at some point, this economy feels like it will not be sustainable. And there's lots of truth to that. But I think the way to, at least the way our perspective on this is the jury is still out. This is sort of the very fast hit play to earn game. So we don't yet fully understand the dynamics of this new business model. And, I think it's true that, these dynamics right now resemble those of a Ponzi scheme, but I wouldn't be too quick to judge. I think, the jury is still out, and for now, we're watching and seeing how the space plays out. The game developers of Axie Sky Mavis have, they're aware of this, and they're thinking of new ways to sort of address this issue. I know they're currently working on releasing a new version of a game called Axie Infinity Origin. I haven't yet checked it out, but yeah, looking forward to see what comes out of that. So that's sort of an overview on the way Axie works. And you might be wondering, okay, so that sounds fantastic. I saw the Philippines, I saw Venezuela. I didn't see anything happening in Africa. So yeah, so as of today, I think I would say Axie Infinity really took off last year. And different people across the world are sort of course, interested in saying, can this model work in other parts of the world? And in Africa specifically, there's been a number of startups that are sort of looking into the play to earning space. So one thing I probably didn't mention is that because the entry point, to play is a bit high. Right now, it's about $300. At some point, it was as high as $1,000. That sort of excludes people who do not have that money upfront. And so there's emerged sort of this new category of, I would call them financiers, called gaming guilds, who essentially lend out these access to people who want to play the game. And so it's sort of like, think of it as a workman who has a tool, who needs a tool to work. For example, you might be an Uber driver, but you don't own the car. So it's sort of a similar concept. So these people are able to lend you, or rather lease you these axes, and then you go and play, and then your earnings are shared with the gaming guild. Some people have said that resembles indentured servitude, but again, I think the jury is still out. So in Africa, there's a couple of people that are trying out that model. Nestcoin has created Metaverse Magna, which is a gaming guild that sort of works like that. And they claim that players can earn up to $1,000 monthly. Again, I think something I probably didn't mention is earning in the game depends on your skill level as well. So if you're skilled, you'll be able to earn more. At the same time, the quality of your axes also affects how much you can earn. If you have higher quality axes, you'll be able to, win more battles. It's a bit different. It's not really play to win, but having higher quality axes, which implies more expensive axes, allows you to earn more. So this might be, how some people might be able to reach about $1,000 monthly. And the other company I want to highlight is called Jumbo, which recently raised 7.5 million. It's based out of the DRC. So Nestcoin is based out of Nigeria, and Xsub is an Egyptian company, primarily focused in the MENA region, but also looking expanding Africa. And yeah, Jumbo is also, similarly trying to lower barriers for money-making opportunities in play to earn gaming for young people in Africa. I would say, looking at all this, I would say it's again still early days, but VCs seem to be bullish just based on the funding rounds we're seeing happening on the continent in this space. And yeah, I guess that's sort of the brief of, our findings into Web3 and how it's likely to shape the future of work.